Hello, and thank you for joining us for Changer Chats. I'm Grant Venable, Director of Change at Be the Change Volunteers. In honor of the coming Memorial Day holiday in the United States, we want to extend thanks to our veterans across the nation who have sacrificed greatly to ensure our freedom. Without our veterans, the mission of Be the Change Volunteers would be absolutely impossible. A special fact that many citizens do not realize is that less than 1% of Americans serve in the military. Today, we welcome my friend, Lieutenant Colonel Leland Webb, formerly active duty for the United States Air Force, now serving as Chief Medical Staff for the 161st Air Refueling Wing Medical Group, Arizona Air National Guard Base in Phoenix, Arizona. Leland has a very special education story, one where through his service in the United States Air Force, he was able to complete his undergraduate degree and a medical degree and continued to general trauma and surgery at Vanderbilt University, and then on to become a Mayo Clinic fellow in plastic surgery. Through his education and his career at the Air Force, he served as a medical officer at the Yokota Air Base Hospital in Japan and also at multiple bases in the USA. He also served on several missions as medical command. And I just want to tell everyone I've had the privilege of knowing Leland through our church, Christ Church of the Valley here in Arizona, over many years. We have become very close friends. Leland, that is a mouthful of achievement. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Change Your Chats.
Thanks, Grant, and thanks for having me. Happy to share my experience.
Thank you so much for your service.
Well, thank you, Grant. Thanks for your support. I mean, it's always good to hear we're definitely working for the citizens of the U.S. when we go to work with the military.
Leland, my kids and our friends know you as Dr. Webb, but on military bases and when you serve at the VA hospital here in Phoenix, you are Lieutenant Colonel Webb. You have a long medical education story because in high school as a teenager, you became an emergency medical technician, an EMT, and that kind of gave you the bug for medicine. Before we dig into and learn about how the U.S. military helps provide support for education beyond high school, would you just give us a little background about you personally and your family and maybe your business?
Yeah, absolutely. Third generation military member. My grandfather was actually in the Army Air Corps and then subsequently the United States Air Force. Great story for him, but a little probably longer than we have time for this vacation stint. My dad was also in the Marine Corps, Vietnam veteran, so he had a very different job than I did as a Marine Recon Battalion leader. And so he always encouraged me to do something that maybe had more to do with saving lives than taking them. And ultimately, when I was younger, like you mentioned, grew up in a small town. We had a volunteer EMS squad, and I kind of got interested in medicine, being on that EMT side. The action of it was always fun to me, but it stopped there for me because a lot of it was that pick up and drop off at that point, and I knew I wanted to do a little bit more. So in talking with my dad, I always knew I wanted to join the military. He said, maybe hold off on being a shooter for the Marines and go on to college and see where life's going to take you. Got to college and I figured, I knew that medicine was in my future. So I went the pre-med route. Now, from an education standpoint and how the military works, there was certainly an opportunity right there to capitalize on things like ROTC to pay for your undergrad. Now, I sadly didn't have that on my radar, to speak. So I paid for college on my own, through a little bit of help with my parents and then a lot of work and scholarships, which I was thankful for. But ultimately, once I got through college, and I got into medical school, I realized that I didn't have any money, and the debt in front of me was going to be probably more than I ever wanted to look at. Mm-hmm. So I started looking back into the military. And at that point, I had a few different options available to me because I was already through college. And again, I preface all of this with, this is kind of my path, and there's probably about 50 different paths, but this one makes a lot of sense. And I think there's a lot of benefits to it as well. So with a college degree behind me, it kind of put me in a different position to look at medical school and apply for what's called the Health Professions Scholarship Program, or HPSP.
All right.
Now, the neat thing about that is essentially once you are honored that scholarship, the military pays for every dollar of your med school. I never saw a bill for tuition. I got every book, every medical supply, every stethoscope, white coat down to my pencils paid for by the military, which was a huge advantage when essentially your entire life and your whole job is to be a student. So for all of my colleagues, every dollar they spent, every gallon of gas they pumped, every movie ticket they bought was with borrowed money. And for me, I had all of my schooling paid for, and then a stipend at that time. Again, this is a long time ago. It was about $1,200, $1,300. But when rent was $500 and you didn't have anything else to do, you had about $700 left, and you could buy your groceries and maybe go out a few times and never dip into the debt of somebody else. So that was a fantastic route to go. Now, again, the thing about that is with every dollar spent on you comes some time you have to pay back.
Right.
And every one of these scenarios has their own unique setup. Now, I actually, didn't get that scholarship till halfway through my first year. So I had to suffer through figuring out how to pay for that first year. But ultimately I got a 3-year HPSP contract, which garnered me a 3-year payback, which is actually a huge advantage. And I think why I bring that up is when you get medical school paid for up front, you're really going to get a year for year payment.
Mm-hmm.
If you try and do what's called financial assistance program, or FAP, is another thing that's offered to people on the back end. So now you've already finished your schooling and you're already in your discipline, whether you're an attorney or you're a vet or you're a medical doctor or another profession, and you want the military to pay back your student loans. That has a limit of up to $45,000 a year, which is a large amount of money. But sometimes those contracts are more like $45,000 buys you 2 years of payback, or so things can add up. So in my mind, probably the most important piece of information I would give, certainly any young person thinking about using the military as an educational, avenue, is try and garner as much as you can for as short of a payback as you can. And it's not that you want that short payback because you don't want to be involved. It's that when you don't owe the military any time, you're a little bit of a free agent. So some doors open for you, whether that's your follow-on base or opportunities to get further education. So I took this HPSP, thankfully saved a bunch of money between my first and second year of med school, went to boot camp, which is a little bit of everything you would think of, people screaming at you. And
it's an education of its own.
Right. And a little bit of knife and fork, learn how to wear a uniform, learn how to salute, learn the etiquette, tongue and quill of the military. And for me, as a direct commission officer, it was a little bit more of how to be an officer and a lot of leadership stuff. And that might be different for other people. If you elect to enlist in the military, that's, you turn 18 and you're ready to just go that route. Maybe you're kind of looking for a little direction. That's definitely an awesome way to go. Because again, in the kind of theme of education, while you're enlisted, even though you may be in the enlisted ranks, not the officer ranks, there are several different ways to get education paid for. One of them, and that's most commonly used, is called tuition assistance. And there are specific things about tuition assistance based on states and where you are. But essentially, I've had several friends who joined the military because they weren't sure what they wanted to do. They said, hey, you know what? I really like business or leadership or something. So they start going to college, whether they go to night classes or they go to online or they go to the local community college, or even some military bases have university campuses on them. And essentially tuition assistance comes along and can pay that as they go. They're garnered that scholarship, that tuition assistance. Some of that is 100% coverage. Some of it's above what they require. And some of it just really takes a big burden off. So I've had friends get their bachelor's degree, get their master's degree while they're serving at no cost to them. Now, The nice thing too is tuition assistance doesn't add more to your time. HPSP was a contract, right? They said, we'll pay for med school. You owe us the time. I got to tell you, the 3 years we spent in Yokota Air Base, Japan, paying back the medical school quote unquote debt was the greatest 3 years of our lives. So I wouldn't exactly call it a bad deal for us.
Yeah.
And then, all of this, I think when everybody thinks about the military and they think about paying for school, they think GI Bill. And interestingly, if you've served on active duty for 91 days, essentially over 90 days, everybody is a candidate to receive the GI Bill. Now, my father, who enlisted in the Marine Corps because he was failing out of college, came back from Vietnam and then used the GI Bill to pay for his school as the first college graduate in our entire bloodline, on the Webb side anyway, my dad's side. And so he did it kind of that traditional way where he served and he came back and he had the GI Bill and it covered the cost of his school. And I will say nowadays, the GI Bill can be used in countless ways. You can cover the cost of classes that you want to take to add on to a degree, or if you're going to do, an additional master's degree, if you already have your bachelor's degree. Some caveats to that is there is a cap on the GI Bill, but let's say that you got out of the military and you wanted to use your GI Bill. There's something also called the Yellow Ribbon Program, and the Yellow Ribbon Program can basically supplement what the GI Bill doesn't cover so that you can go to select schools. And there are a lot of them. I don't want you to think that it's just, your state school. And you get your education for free, in addition to a stipend that's usually on the order of the E6 rank. So maybe somewhere between $2,500 and $3,000 a month. So those are options. And then interestingly for our story, my wife and I entered the military, had kids. I never used my GI Bill. So I had the health profession scholarship that paid for med school. I was able to get through undergrad on my own and with a little bit of help, but I have this GI Bill and I had no idea. I just figured, well, I'm not going to go to culinary school or something, so it probably would go to waste. And my wife already had a master's. Well, time in the military teaches you, all kinds of things. And you learn that if you've been active for 6 years, you can actually transfer that GI Bill to your dependents. Now that could be your wife or which is unreal. So when I hit 6 years of active duty, I transferred that to my kids. Now, caveat there, if you transfer a 4-year GI Bill, you incur a 4-year commitment. So it can get a little tricky. Is it worth doing 4 more years of active duty? So what I actually did, I actually transferred it once I joined the Air National Guard because it incurred 4 more years, but in the Guard, weekend a month, not 4 more active duty years. Nevertheless, in October of this year, the GI Bill, all 4 years, goes to my kids, either 2 and 2, or if somebody gets a scholarship, the other one can have the whole GI Bill. And nowadays, that's basically money in our pocket that we don't have to pay for. I didn't see that coming. I think the most interesting thing was I knew I wanted to join the military, thought it was cool that I could get medical school paid for. And then I really didn't realize all the follow-on benefits of being in an institution such as the military and then being a veteran. I think some of the things that popped up is even after you're out, you're going to be bombarded by the VA about educational benefits that exist. And even if it's a couple or a few $1,000s for you, your kids, your spouse, I mean, these things make an impact for everybody. And everybody's going to probably have a different path. And we're touching on maybe a half a dozen things: tuition assistance, financial assistance program, GI Bill, and HPSP. But again, I mentioned ROTC and obviously the academies and things like that. But
yeah,
I think especially this day and age where education's expensive and everybody thinks it's going to get forgiven, but even your ability to get it forgiven may be difficult. To start out life without ever having that, shackle was huge for me and my family. Just the ability to basically start above water, above ground, and not be in a hole trying to fill that hole up before we could make a way. I think the thing that keeps people away from the military is the fear of the unknown, the volatility of our world. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how, there's no two ways about it. You roll the dice a little bit, you take a chance. I mean, I think if you are a professional, you want to make sure you're doing that professional job. If you just enlist, then you're going to fall into the category of the needs of the military.
Mhm.
will come first.
And there are vocational trainings within the military. So I have some friends who from different branches, but there's also some vocational training that you can receive within the military as well. Not necessarily a professional career path like you're on, but
Yeah, I mean, 100%. You can think about it, whether you end up in a civil engineering squadron and you're learning about basically everything from layouts of a base to the electrical to the mechanical things. If you're in the Air Force and you're dealing with, the mechanical nature of jet engines, you're leaving there with a skill set that nobody's going to be able to take away from you.
yeah.
A lot of that is on the job. You're being taught how to be a aircraft mechanic, while you're in the military, and you get to leave with that.
I remember when for a year, we'd known each other for a while, but there was a year that you and your family had to leave and go to another base out of state. And those bases are just their own little communities, really. I mean, they've got everything, right? You've got kids. How does it work? Do they go to the public schools outside the base, or are there schools on the base?
Well, so it's a little bit dependent on how big of a base you're on, but thankfully, every base we were on had an education system. So when we were in Japan, there was, K through 12, which was neat. Now, again, you have the opportunity to have your kid educated off base. Some of our friends actually did that in Japan. On base, our kids in Japan were small. On base at Travis Air Force Base in California, they went to the on base school. It turned out it was actually one of the best schools in the school district, and only military kids had access there. So, tons of different opportunities. I do know some friends who sent their high schoolers off base because maybe the high school changed. And I think, like you alluded to, an Air Force base that is a big Air Force base. I mean, it is like a small community. You got essentially a Walmart and a grocery store, fast food restaurants, a hospital. It's kind of a standalone thing. So it's
Mhm.
kind of a neat, and probably the best thing when you're raising a family. We lived on base every chance we could. I mean, you basically live in a gated community with armed guards, and
Yeah.
everybody's on the same team. It was a lot of fun.
Send the kids out on the bicycles and tell them not to come back until the street lights turn on, right?
Exactly. It's hard to find these days.
Well, Leland, I just want to tell you, we are grateful for your service and the mission to be the change volunteers. I can say this with 100% certainty would be absolutely impossible without the protection of our military globally. So we thank you for the sacrifice and time that you've made. We thank Sarah for the sacrifices she's made as your wife. And we are just grateful to all the members of the military that have volunteered with BTCV, but also their service in our world. So I want to
Well,
thank you for
thanks.
joining us today and thank you for sharing your story and your knowledge with us.
Thanks, Grant. I mean, I'd leave you with the anybody listening to this or anybody that, we come in contact who's interested, just find somebody who's been through it. And I feel like I have seen a lot of different avenues and have a lot of friends enlisted, officer, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines. And the path can be different for everybody, but getting some good advice so you don't get, the wool pulled over your eyes is probably the most important thing. I can't even say I had it all together. I just thought I was getting med school paid for, but if I could give anything back, it would be kind of the experience we've had to somebody who wants to move forward.
Dr. Webb, Lieutenant Colonel Webb, thank you very much for joining us on Changer Chats.
You bet. Thanks, Grant.
If you like Changer Chats and you'd like to hear more Changer Chats, check them out on www.btcd.us. Thanks and be the change.